something we could start now, and still have some fun, and as people drift in, that'd probably be a good idea. I just want to. I've introduced everybody, but I wanted to get some impressions before. John and I are going to have a chat about this, but Brennan and Yogi, join in on this if you were if you'd like to. And that's I just wanted to spend some time before we started the presentations. We got two panels, and the panels are great. That panel you did yesterday, Brendan, was fabulous, and Yogi's is and yours is going to be great today as well. So we'll go through the panels, and we can talk about those as well. But I wanted to. I'll introduce the sponsors later, but I'm going to introduce John, and we're going to go through, because I couldn't bear watching myself. No, it's not that I couldn't bear watching you can't. There's only so much attention you can pay to the show that's going on while you're doing the show. Even though I was trying to get to the sessions, watch them go through, add stuff to the chat and all that sort of thing. And by the way, anybody who's coming in, please, we're going to just do a little bit of pre-show and a little bit of wrap up from yesterday. But please feel free to put your comments in the chat. We will be pleased to see it or hear what you've got to say. So, John, I'm going to introduce John Delgrande. He's I think you're a friend, John. I think I can introduce you as a friend by this many years, right? In there,
after so many sessions, that's right.
Yeah, after a while, yeah, we click the card. You get that friend pass after a while. So anyway, John, welcome. John is the CIO of Ecclesiastical Insurance.
The tongue twister.
Yeah,
Ecclesiastical Insurance.
Yeah. Tell me a little. After all the time I've known you, I actually Googled the company and I think at one point went all the stuff. You tell me a little bit about Ecclesiastical, because it is an unusual company.
Yeah, so we operate in 4 countries: the UK, Ireland, Canada, and Australia, under different brands. In Canada, we particularly focus on commercial insurance.
Yep.
So you usually don't see us as the front and center insurer, because we're funded by brokers, but we insure retirement homes, schools, churches, some famous buildings like the Edinburgh Theatres and the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Wow, you insure the Hockey Hall of Fame?
Yes.
Wow, everybody, everybody. I'm sure that's not unusual at that. Everybody grabs that one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of specialized risks and interesting buildings.
Well, yeah, a pretty old building too. Yeah. So you were. I was just explaining to everybody that although I was trying to watch as much as I could yesterday, and obviously I had a couple of panels, so I theoretically should know what happened on those panels. But what were your impressions of yesterday? What jumped out to you?
Yeah, a lot of fundamentals of cyber, and we talked about data right from the beginning. Right, that's the core thing you got to look at. You can have a zillion endpoints and all kinds of technology, but data is the core of what people are after and what we're set up to protect.
Yeah, glad you got that, and that was my I was trying to get my phrase right in the introduction, which is we get folks so focused on the how, we forget what we're protecting, and that the data thing we started to develop that presentation was really understanding the data. And Yogi's going to do Yogi Schultz, who's, I don't know if people can see all of the people in there. Yogi Schultz is going to do something on doing an evaluation of your risk posture, and one of the things that I hope you'll cover that as well, but I started out ours looking at data. I worked from the data outwards on ours, and I thought it was a really unique piece. That was good. What else did you come up with?
Yeah, I guess one of the themes through all the presentations, and it came down to humans and people, and the human side of cybersecurity was the really interesting kind of theme that was weaved through everything, right from the Ryerson's Cyber Catalyst School to law enforcement to the Center for Cybersecurity. It's all about building relationships. It's kind of like it's theme 1, right? Whether it's relationships with law enforcement, other groups, building alliances within your organization as a CISO to be part of that C-suite, and looking in terms of those third parties as well to find the right solutions that you need to address your risks.
Yeah. the tool sets come in there as well. Did you identify with that Kyndryl presentation where they were given like this impossibly short period of time to rebuild their network? Wasn't that jumped out at me? That was so amazing. And I know the guys at Kyndryl, and you know they really do take this resilience thing seriously. Like but to start a company and immediately have huge clients, everything's running. And by the way, it's like that old commercial: we got to rebuild the plane while you're flying. Yeah.
In today's world, resilience is really the key, because it's the whole thing of being a digital world. People are expecting to be online 24/7. Transactions are processing depending on what you're doing. So that business resiliency, is that key aspect of responding and protecting, your organization.
Yeah. And people are coming in the audience. If you've got insights from yesterday, just put them into the chat. We'd be glad to see them in there as well. What else grabbed you from yesterday, John?
Yeah, I guess, bring it back down to the other aspects of human, we talk about training, right? And humans involved in the processes. So building that awareness, making sure people understand their job functions, growing talent from within, and even understanding that we can put in all the technical controls in the world that we want. Humans are still responsible for configuring them, for applying them, and for using the day to day.
Cool. Glad. Yeah, I'm glad that came out, because that was really intentional. We had the two sessions. The guys from Gartner doing the quiet hiring, and the TMU, which we have a workshop from TMU today, which I'm enthusiastic about a lot of things. I guess that's why I do this job, but the TMU really does have a really novel approach for getting people and getting them into cybersecurity from backgrounds you might not normally expect.
And then I saw the comment from folks is that CrowdStrike's always a good pleaser in terms of understanding, what are the bad guys up to? What are they seeing?
Yeah.
And as you see, they always take the vector of least resistance. There's a lot of sophisticated cyber people out there and bad guys, but you have to remember that 90% of them are just going to try and look for the easiest path in, whether it's, existing credentials, open ports, open vulnerabilities. That the basics are what usually get you.
Yeah. Yes, there's Steve from the audience in there. Thanks for the comment, Steve. That was, the Duke was really great with that. I think those, I see a lot. We get a lot of, there's a million reports, you get of threats and stuff like that. I think CrowdStrike really did a good job of putting that into a context. I really like that. And Jeff says, you remember how globalized cyber crime is. Yeah, we forget you want to be a global city if you come from Toronto, or you want to be on the global scene if you're from Canada. Do you really want to? Because the threats come from places very far away. I was looking at this, somebody was being doxxed. I don't want to get into American politics, but somebody was being doxxed on a website. It's in Russia. What do you do? We have no borders. Cyber criminals have zero borders. Matter of fact, they have some very friendly places to live in the world if you're a cyber criminal.
If you're lucky enough to be an organization that's maybe just centered in Canada and that's your audience and who you're dealing with, then you can maybe put your defenses to basically block everything from the outside world, assuming you don't have customers who are traveling. But when you've got global companies or things where people could be banking from anywhere in the world and needing to come see your services or interact with you, then it becomes harder and harder to understand what's good and what's bad. And even legitimate people do travel to Russia and China and all these other places like that. So although a lot of the nation attacks come from there, your legit customers, legit transactions come from there as well.
Yeah, interesting how that goes. So, John, out of all the stuff that you came up with, or we came up with yesterday, what, as a CIO yourself, what are you gonna? How's it gonna affect what you do?
Yeah, I think, as we kind of said, number one, it's going back to basics, is making sure that we understand our data, how it's being used, interacting with our other business leaders in our organization to make sure they understand cyber risks, and each and individual person has a part to play in that, right? So it starts from the top, from the culture, And we have to remind ourselves that, we can, like I said, put lots and lots of security controls on. We don't want to be the department of no in security.
Yeah.
And we have to be enablers as technology. So we need to make sure people are well aware of what they should be using data for, how to conduct themselves. And we know phishing and these things are getting much more sophisticated, but if we teach them what to look for, at least we can significantly reduce the potential for attacks.
Yeah. And as much as all the miracles we get to, and we talk about these things, the thing that always comes back to me, even doing a session like this, is remembering. And I know it sounds trite to say it's the people, but it is. If your people are trained, if you've got a culture if you see something, say something. If you've got people who are taking that little extra bit of care, if you're doing the basics of updating your software, if you've got two-factor, multi-factor authentication, and everybody talks about zero trust, but zero trust is an attitude as much as it is a technology. Zero trust is, I don't trust it till it's proven, which is a great attitude to have if you do cybersecurity, or even if you're an employee.
Yeah, and we gotta, remember that we need to keep that in mind right from the top, right? And it's got to be from our CEOs, the presidents, and stuff. Because how many, I'm sure, people have where a lot of their senior people want open access to things, quick and easy, and we have to remind them, saying like, look, you're the actual potential vector of attack. If we give you open access, turn off your MFA for ease of convenience, yours is the account that's going to be breached. So we have to, have the discussion with them, make sure that they understand, their place, and that the controls are there for a reason. And we want to make sure things can move and things can happen quickly, but we want to make sure we have the right layers of protection to protect them.
And that understanding is so important. I used a phrase from yesterday. I said, that somebody, when I was studying change management and I was first being coached in it 100 years ago, was the message that stuck with me is, don't know what you're going to change, but explain why you're changing. I think that's a great point. Fabulous. Okay, we're going to get started with our next panel. John, thank you for coming in and doing this. This is great. I feel like I've got this little sports desk here that our team. Oh, you left the fire in the back, and oh, sorry, I got to get this.
I'll have my coffee.
This is my pumpkin spice latte over here. I got to get this. Like my hands are moving around weird in here, so you get your pumpkin spice latte over there. You can take that.
Thanks, Jim, for the opportunity to reflect on yesterday and talk about common themes. And I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of the program today.
Yeah, well, great. And hang around, join us in the chat. And we got Yogi Schultz and Brendan Schmidt, who are our facilitators in there. Yogi and Brendan, can you say hi? Just, I don't know if we can spotlight you or whatever, but I'm not going to make people work too much, but just say hi and let everybody know that you're there.
Good morning, Jim, and everyone in our virtual audience. Looking forward to the day's discussion about various subtopics within the broader cybersecurity realm. There's lots to talk about. As you said, Jim, we need to build on what was discussed yesterday, a broad range of interesting topics that I think was rewarding to our audience. And
hold up your book. Hold up your book. Come on, Yogi's an author. This is his new book, and he's got to learn. I'm trying to teach him to publicize it everywhere. Take a copy of the book with you everywhere you can, and remember, autograph them, because when you autograph them, they can't return them.
I've heard that.
So. Great. Yeah. Okay. And the other people are coming in. Randy's coming up. There's Brennan. Hi, Brennan. How you doing? You're on mute.
Brennan's on mute.
The famous line. We'll get the t-shirts, but you're on mute.
The famous line. Oh, well, it's so great to be here, Jim, and thanks so much to you and your team, and great to be like Yogi had mentioned there, continuing yesterday's conversation, because it certainly is important. There's a lot of key takeaways that we learned, I know, from last year, and I think that it's just always exciting to see what we can build from and see what we can put into use. So really excited for today's session.
Yeah, your session with the police, I have to say, that was fantastic yesterday, and you've got another one coming today in healthcare, so that'll be great in there. So if you're in the audience, the reason I want to take a lot of time doing this, but I wanted to make sure you know that we're out there. People are in the background share on the chat if you want to ask questions, and they can put in there. And I'm going to get we got Randy Purse from TMU is out there as well. Randy, welcome.
Hi, Jim. Thanks, and hello, everybody. It'll be interesting to talk this afternoon about a little bit about the talent management playbook and some of the challenges that we're having in that space with respect to developing talent.
I'm looking forward to your workshop on there, and I know that there's always these things when you do these events that people, the workshop feels like it's at the after, you're going to leave and move on. Don't do that. Don't do that in this particular occasion, because I've been through this stuff with TMU, and there's some really, really good things that you can use and take away from this. And then Yogi's got another workshop in there, which is on cybersecurity evaluations, and we've managed to get these two guys in here to do this these workshops. Don't miss them. You'll get a lot from them. They're going to be highly interactive, and I think you may even have some fun in there. So welcome back to day 2 of MapleSEC. Got an exciting day planned. This is my background's blurred, but I'm back in my home office here, and this, which is great. My home studio, really, in there. So we've got an exciting day planned. We've got lots of content for you, but before we go forward, I want to recognize the sponsors, and I know that this is a thing a host is supposed to do, but I'm serious about this. We're a publisher. In Canada, how does a publisher make $1 million? Well, you start with 10 million and keep going till you've only got 1 million left. It's not, you don't make a ton of money as a publisher in Canada, but we do it because we love it. And we can't do that without sponsors. We can't bring these events. We can't do these things without that. So Ricoh, Kyndryl, Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, Okta, TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, in collaboration with the Rogers Cybersecure Catalysts, VMware, who's also got a session today, which I think is going to be great on hiding in the network. And this one opened my eyes as well. And of course, the CIO Association and Gartner and the McKinsey Institute, who are friends of the program. And I want to thank them all. And my message for anybody out there in the audience is, please, you get a call from them. You don't have to buy anything. Just thank them for sponsoring. That's all you got to do. Just thank the person for sponsoring this. So anyway, that's welcome to the sponsors. I'm going to move without more delay to the first panel discussion of the day. And this is this idea of am I on track, Crystal? First panel is there. Yeah. Our first panel is this idea of, I used to do a lot of consulting in heavy industry. And so I asked Yogi to come in and put this Brendan, no, this is what that's this we're doing the healthcare first. Sorry, I'm doing the same thing I did yesterday. I'm the first one is the healthcare panel, right, Crystal? She's out there.
Correct. Yes. You're with Brennan now on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So the first one is healthcare. I got them confused in there. First panel discussion of the day it talks about healthcare and cybersecurity. There's the first time I did anything, Brendan, and I won't take much time from your panel in this, but the first time I ever watched a medical device work, I realized that it was a Linux device with very bad security, and that was my introduction to healthcare technology, and it freaked me out when I realized I could hack this device myself, and I'm not that good. I don't consider myself to be a super hacker, but I could break into this device. And it scared the heck out of me. Yeah.
It's amazing, Jim, and exactly to that point, there's I remember the first time that I heard that there's some medical imaging devices that are running Windows XP. It blows your mind just in terms of how, it's no longer supported, but at the same time, in order to keep these machines running, they need to be isolated and still deliver services. So I think folks are definitely going to hear a bit of a different perspective in terms of how we can't really treat change management. Earlier, you were mentioning change management is a little bit different when it comes to healthcare. And I think that folks will be quite intrigued by some key takeaways that our panelists share in terms of how you might be able to really lean on what some of those challenges are, especially in healthcare. And if you are in healthcare, definitely some huge takeaways there.
Okay, so if we're set up, we're going to roll this. We're going to leave our pumpkin spice latte behind. You're going to take the panel. through the magic of teleporting, right? That's how this will happen.
Well, I just want to start by saying thanks so much to each of you for joining us here today for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating topic about the convergence of technology in business and healthcare. It's not something that is typically brought up, so that's why what better way than to discuss this and its importance in the context of cybersecurity than to bring in today's panel of experts. So welcome. We'll start things off by asking the first question, which is really around the importance of data and modern technology and how it's enabling the delivery of healthcare. Let's start by going around here and giving your perspective on that very question. So, David, how important is data and modern technology when it comes to enabling the delivery of healthcare?
It's critically important, and I say that because I'm the spouse of an X-ray technologist whose entire work, diagnostic imaging, relies on now incredibly complex digital technologies for taking X-rays, MRIs, and more, and then storing and accessing them as quickly as possible to enable patient diagnosis and care. So when that system goes down, which sadly we have seen in attacks across healthcare organizations around the world, healthcare is back 100 years. And we've also seen some powerful examples of the impact of IT due to its absence. So when we look at the attacks on New England hospital healthcare systems, when they lost their data due to a ransomware attack, their ability to deliver chemotherapy services dropped by 75%. And even more disheartening, they had to go back to patients. And keep in mind, these patients are often quite ill and say, do you remember what chemotherapy drugs and what dosage were you on? Because our records are gone. So you can see as much as a 90% reduction in capacity in hospitals when IT is gone.
Vivek, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Pranav. So absolutely, data is very critical. As we move towards digitization of healthcare service delivery, data is that is driving not just in the context of what we want to do in future years, but also in the context of how we can leverage those data to come to specific outcomes and things like that. And part of my role is essentially focused on data is in the context of making sure we are protecting the right data with the right security controls. So what we are doing at eHealth Saskatchewan is we are very ultra focused on making sure that data is classified as per our classification requirements, and those appropriate security controls are deployed across the board based on the data classification. Of course, that's a work in progress. We essentially want to protect data based on the sensitivity nature of the data, but not necessarily, but still be able to make that data available as required by the relevant stakeholders for their respective business purposes.
And Matt, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, my perspective it comes from helping SaaS providers delivering services to the healthcare field, and I fully agree that the outcomes, both in business and in healthcare, I mean, the importance of data and data-driven decisions can't be understated here, and technology provides the tools to integrate that data into their workflows in these healthcare provider environments. So, I would say, data and technology is just ultimately going to drive better decisions and better care and better efficiency in, any sort of healthcare environment. It's absolutely critical. I don't think you can even provide care at this point without all this information that we've gotten used to having.
Well, yeah, I mean, no longer is it an IT environment that's exclusively a server and a endpoint inside a hospital. You're now talking about the importance of patient records flowing across multiple institutions, everything from small clinics and facilities to large hospitals to centralized patient record systems to drug monitoring systems. We've now created this ecosystem which can deliver better outcomes and care for patients. And then you've got now increasingly the use of software as a service. And software as a service can enable affordable, accessible, timely technologies at scale to organizations that otherwise might not be able to afford it. But you're also trusting somebody else's entire chain of security controls, maturity, et cetera, as part of that conversation. And depending on the SaaS, it may be peripheral to your business, or it's the billing system, and you're not able to operate your hospital in certain contexts because you can't do any of those administrative functions.
And what's coming to mind for you, Vivek?
So what we are doing is we are treating security as a program rather than a one-off as a combination of technology projects. So in that regards, organizations need to start looking in the context of building an information security management system and continue to focus on improvements within that program as part of the plan to check it cycle. Of course, because healthcare is specifically a bit different from other industries because it has a lot of healthcare regulatory requirements in the context of provincial healthcare laws, as well as there are federal laws and things like that. And what might help in that regards is using that standardized approach, whether it's ISO, whether it's some other industry standard that is well recognized across the board.
David, earlier you had talked about medical technology, and I think Vivek, you had mentioned IT operations management, and there's a whole bunch of other great pieces here, especially when it comes to programs. I'm just wondering if we can maybe shift gears a little bit here and start talking about that. So why don't we start, David, if you can talk a bit about medical technology and build off of what Vivek was talking about, and then Matt can come in and talk about SaaS. I think that'd be fascinating for our listeners.
Yeah, I think it's often in outside of healthcare context, you hear information technology, which is really the business systems that run an organization. And then often you hear the term operational technology or OT, sometimes for the deep nerds, information control systems, ICS / supervisory control and data acquisition, SCADA systems, just in case, we want to go real into the acronyms. But the reality is hospitals in particular can have this third category, which is medical device technologies. In this case, it's everything from drug pumps that are there and are network controlled. And actually, sadly, there have been drug pumps that had simple FTP server 0-day vulnerabilities on them. So you could give people potentially lethal doses of drugs if you had access to those things, right up to medical devices implanted or embedded into the human body. Things like insulin pumps, things like the heart regulators. Those are all medical technology systems that can have an impact on life systems. Whereas OT in a healthcare setting can be things like your heat, your lights. These are all also important for patient outcomes and care, but they're not intimately connected into the biological system. So I think that's an important distinction to be made, because there's also different regulatory insights, oversights, or gaps for medical technology compared to what exists for IT and for OT.
Yeah, and something to add to that when we compare and contrast that with cloud and SaaS is these medical technology devices. A lot of times it's embedded devices or other types of things with very long life cycles, which is and long patching cycles, and they tend to be maybe isolated from other things in the environment. Then we have cloud services that are the total opposite of that. They're made to be ubiquitously accessible and very rapid lifestyle and feature updates and those types of things. And when we have to bridge those and integrate the two worlds, it starts to get tricky there. And that's something I think we really struggle with in the healthcare space. Is we have a lot of this, I hate to use the word legacy, but this legacy equipment or this medical technology equipment that may have been around for a very long time, and we're trying to integrate it with newer systems. And we've got, patients who having an app or access to their information, I mean, that's that from the web or through an app on their phone or something, and that's becoming table stakes now from a patient perspective.
And Vivek, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
Yes, Brandon. So part of that equation is oftentimes you would find that, IT systems and the medical infrastructure are often integrated. So one should look into the context of whether they need to be segregated, in what form, because the needs of medical technologies is fundamentally different in regards to cybersecurity.
And I'll just add in there are two distinct pressures that are going to cause those security controls for the medical environment to be under unique threats. And the first one is the business drivers. So in a area where we're trying to understand healthcare costs, whether you're for profit or the Canadian model, you still want to understand where the spending is. So there's a strong urge to tie that drug pump and how much drug it's delivering into the billing and accounting systems on the billing side. And how do you do that safely and securely when the assumptions and presumptions around the two environments, to Vivek's point, are often entirely different? Then there's another pressure, and this comes from the advancement of network technology. The days of physically separate, distinct logical networks where they have different wires and different switches segmented, those are gone. We are now into virtualized networking in a way that's incredibly efficient, incredibly powerful, but also introduces incredible chaos if someone makes a mistake and crosses the business and the medical technology networks in ways that are easy on a keyboard that would have been difficult because you would have physically had to have moved some wires.
These are all fascinating comments, and I think that lends itself to the next question, which really is, I think some folks, if I was to channel those listening right now, they're probably wondering, well, what makes healthcare so unique that we just can't simply bring in enterprise security implementations? So I want us to unpack that question, and it looks like we'll start off with Matt, and then we'll go to Vivek, and then we'll end with David.
I think really what it comes down to in healthcare is you've got unique workflows that aren't present in other industries, that only exist in healthcare, and you have unique tooling that integrates into those workflows that really only exists in healthcare in this way. Like, yeah, you may have X-ray machines in other areas, but the way they're being used in healthcare and the workflows that they have are unique. And because of this, you end up with sort of unique risk profiles. And, in the IT space, if a system goes down or something, it's not usually a life and death sort of thing. Where in healthcare, like, you also have that. So there's a certain risk aversion there to the amount of uptime that you have to have on all of these systems. But when you look at all of the systems and the layers that are in place, I mean, you've got complexity over complexity over complexity in a very high uptime environment that may be very unforgiving of mistakes and issues, outages, those types of things.
And Vivek, what's coming to mind for you?
So if you go by the definition of information security, of course, there's a CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Healthcare, for its all practical purposes, has been ultra focused on the availability piece of it, as Matt mentioned. So what one thing needs to happen, and I believe it's happening across the industry, healthcare is not unique to it. There's a lot of awareness that needs to happen on the confidentiality and integrity piece of it. The latest incidents that we see, especially in regards to the healthcare, and now it starts to impact that healthcare service delivery. It starts to impact patient care lives, and it starts to impact other elements of all the healthcare. Security is being seen differently, and part of it is security is not just a technology issue. It's now becoming a business problem. Right. And as part of that business conversation, security needs to be well aligned with the business requirement and be able to support the business in regards to those needs rather than being an outlier.
Sounds like a lot of change to navigate. What say you, David?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. There was a fascinating study a few years ago, and a lot of the media got this study wrong. And originally the headline said, patient outcomes, particularly for cardiac care, suffered after ransomware incidents. And it made it seem like the incidents themselves impacted the patient care. But when you unpack the study, what it actually found was the application of enterprise standard cybersecurity techniques and approaches slowed down the timely delivery of patient care. So nurses couldn't log in as quickly into systems, pull up the information they needed as required for the patients, and things got slower. And time is of the essence in healthcare in a busy emergency room like nobody's business. So we cannot just take enterprise security models and drop it into a healthcare context, which is why I support the development of specific credentials for healthcare cybersecurity professionals, because you have to be able to marry the context with the appropriateness of the controls. And we talk a lot about this labor shortage in cybersecurity. It's even more acute when you talk about specializations.
Great stuff, and I really wish we had more time to delve into this, but really appreciate each of you sharing your time with us here today. Matt, Vivek, David, thank you once again. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
A really interesting panel in there. So, Jogi, yeah, now we're sitting they're just toying with us now in there. So, Brennan, what was the big takeaway from that panel for you when you sat through that?
I think it's a great question, Jim, and I think it all comes down to that whole notion behind thinking about things differently, and trying to make sure that we're actually mapping the way in which we engage with these different audiences in a way that makes sense, and just not sort of rubber stamping these cybersecurity programs. As you heard from folks on the panel, there's a multitude of ways that we need to start thinking about this, and it really doesn't come down to just dollars and cents. Really, it comes down to making sure that lives can be saved, and that we ultimately have better health outcomes.
Yeah. Yogi, you got the next panel coming up on this, and did you see some similarities with healthcare and OT?
Absolutely. What I heard there was that these diagnostic devices and the devices that produce treatment are OT devices, which is what we're going to talk about. By that, I mean operational technology. And I like the comment about how the focus has been on availability, making sure the product doesn't screw up, kill patients, misdiagnose them, give them too much or the wrong drugs or not enough, at the expense of cybersecurity defenses and resilience. So I'm hopeful that these individuals that Brennan interviewed can pound the table to those vendors and say, we love what you've done so far, but now we need better cybersecurity. I'd be interested to know if that's going on or not in the healthcare sector.
Yeah. And one of my mantras has always been, like when things get terrible in cybersecurity and everything else, it's not going to kill you. Well, actually in healthcare, it might. And I'm not making light of that. I don't know if I'd like that level of responsibility.
Well, OT systems in other industries as well can absolutely kill you.
Yeah.
Or destroy a neighborhood or whatever disaster you want to conjure up.
I did a lot of work in mining at one point and spent a lot of time there, and safety was everything. And we were integrated as part of the IT team. We broke a safety rule, people died. And that was reinforced to me. And that was the first time that I've ever felt that level of responsibility. And people would turn on you if you didn't wear your hard hat, you didn't do the right things. And they built a culture of safety. And we talk about building a culture of cybersecurity. Anyway, I want to steal your thunder. So Brennan, any last words from you on the panel?
I just want to say thanks again so much for the opportunity, and definitely let's make sure to keep the conversation going. Like our panelists said, healthcare certainly is something that we might not necessarily think about, but we probably should be.
Yeah. So Yogi, we're going to turn it over to you and this panel on OT cybersecurity, which I find to be a fascinating topic. So I'm going to leave you to just to provide a little bit of an introduction, then we'll dive into the panel.
Sure. Well, this panel arose from a conversation that you and I had, Jim, where we talked about how all of the cybersecurity discussion and focus seems to be on IT security, all of the applications and networks that we're running, and perhaps OT, what are the systems that run our critical production assets, ought to receive some more attention. And that led to us organizing the panel that we want to share with you now. And if you as an organization have some OT devices, and by the way, you may not be operating a nuclear reactor or a refinery, which are examples of huge critical infrastructure facilities. Even very small manufacturing facilities have a surprising amount of OT, and you wonder if anybody's paying attention to that.
Yeah.
So that's why we thought it would be useful for everyone to hear some discussion on what we can do in the world of OT cybersecurity, or what we should be thinking about and doing.
And you've got a great team in there. You've really chosen this panel as well.
Yeah, we've got Keyera, which is a midstream oil and gas organization. Midstream means they're sitting between the producer and the refinery, and so there's a lot of transportation, and there is some improvement of quality, and they have significant critical infrastructure. And then we have MetroLinks, which the people in Toronto will be very much aware of, particularly given the recent outage that CN experienced. But by the way, that was not a cybersecurity outage, but nonetheless, it was an outage that affected a lot of people. So we have Tom from MetroLinks, and then we have our third.
What, Ronnie Scott? So you got the Charter? Is that CT?
Charter? Yeah. So they're a vendor. They're helping people figure out what to do in the world of OT cybersecurity, and they have customers. You mentioned mining, naturally oil and gas, utilities that all have significant critical assets.
Right. Well, let's roll a panel.
Welcome to the MapleSEC 2023 OT Cybersecurity Panel Discussion. I want to welcome our panelists today. I'll start with Tom Everett, the Vice President of Systems Architecture, and he's a CISO at MetroLinks. His past roles in information technology have included retail, energy, and marketing. He enjoys retro computing and building safe, reliable IT solutions. He currently lives in Calgary, Alberta. Our next panelist is Chad Gross. He's the OT cybersecurity and automation specialist at Keyera. Keyera is a large-scale midstream oil and gas company based in Calgary, Alberta. Chad has spent the last 21 years working in the Alberta oil patch, focusing primarily on systems integration and automation. In his spare time, Chad can be found on his farm, raising Highland cattle or tinkering in his home lab. He holds an industrial instrumentation engineering technology designation from the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. Last but by no means least, Ronnie Scott is currently the Chief Technology Officer at Charter Telecom, Inc., a value-added reseller specializing in IT and OT service delivery. As a CTO, Ronnie brings his extensive technology background with a strong business and service delivery lens to enterprise IT and OT infrastructure solution. He has 35 years of broad IT experience, including programming, network architecture, and senior consulting role in various industries in New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. Welcome, gentlemen, to our panel today. So let me just give a brief introduction to what we're going to discuss. We're going to focus on the state of operational technology, abbreviated OT, cybersecurity, in various industries. So let me start you off with something. Information technology, i.e. IT, cybersecurity, appears to receive much more visibility and attention than operational technology, i.e. OT cybersecurity. What do you attribute this to? Or perhaps you disagree with this particular comment. Ronnie, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Yogi. Yes, it's an interesting discussion, this. I think part of the situation is that OT has historically been a little bit more back of house. It doesn't mean that security hasn't been high on the mindset of all those running operational networks, but to some extent there's been this separation, these two worlds, and until recently, as data has become much more prevalent and people have been much more interested in seeing their operational networks, we've tended to leave the operational network completely isolated and separated, and in some cases not connected to the internet at all. Increasingly, as we join those two worlds, we're seeing a significant change, and OT is becoming much more relevant and much more prevalent conversation as we talk about security today.
So maybe we should just keep OT off the internet and we'll all be fine.
Yeah, the big question of why, that's a great one to start with. I mean, obviously, that could be the easy approach, but I think people want to know what's happening in the operational networks, especially executives, business decision makers, planners who need to see what's happening to be able to see where are we going, where do we need to improve, and so on. So there's value in the IT world as well, and it's bringing those two together safely. That's the important start.
Okay, so Chad, I'm sure with all of those field operations that Kiera has, there's lots of OT cybersecurity. How are you coping with all that?
Yeah, I think Ronnie nailed it there. This stuff did used to be islanded, not connected to the internet at all. And, there is more and more need for external connectivity, whether that's vendor support for specialized equipment, whether that's reporting or, business analytics. We're even starting to see things like, advanced process control. That's maybe looking at various networks spread geographically. They're separated, but, that process, those two might rely on each other now to squeak out a few extra % production or whatever the case might be.
Is there a difference between IT cybersecurity and OT cybersecurity? Or is this just a labeling issue or a mindset issue?
Well, there's a huge difference. The equipment that's used in OT networks is fundamentally different than the equipment that's used in the data center. Related to and can communicate with, but it's fundamentally very different. There's also a different business expectation around it, where we can take a temporary outage of a system that's in our data center most of the time. A lot of field systems can't take any sort of outage ever. So there's a huge reliability aspect which differentiates OT systems from IT systems.
Yeah, I think that philosophy is really important to differentiate. With operational networks, it's always about always on. And IT, there are some mission critical components of the IT world, but the IT world is often about getting visibility, improving process, and so on. And we're prepared to allow people to go places, to work from places, to be free. We're more of an enabler rather than that mission critical underlay. And that enabling in the IT world says we're going to bend the rules that you'd never want to bend in an operational world.
The other piece of that puzzle too is your OT system is interacting with physical objects. So the result of a breach or a threat actor gaining successful access to your system, physically we could damage equipment, we could have some kind of an environmental release, or we could hurt or kill people. So that's another big thing to look at.
OT at operational facilities has been dominated by relatively obscure network protocols. Have those protocols made it easier or more difficult to attack these facilities?
You say in the question, have these facilities been dominated by obscure network protocols? And obscure is an interesting word because the whole security through obscurity thing was actually a form of protection and has been and probably still is in certain cases.
I think when I look at OT networks in my world, the biggest risk to the OT network is the IT network it's connected to. And we have conversations about if there is an incident, how do we disconnect so that we can keep the OT network safe and operational in the case that we lose the IT network?
Perhaps you could comment on some trends that you're observing in OT cybersecurity, both on the attack and on the defense side. And how are you responding to those? Is anything changing? Is it a matter of volume or sophistication or something else?
What I'm noticing is an increased interest in OT on the behalf of what I would call traditional IT security vendors. So it's a new market for them. And it's very beneficial to us because it allows us to use the same or similar tools, a similar approach, similar software to bring the OT network into the cybersecurity ecosystem. So that the same way we monitor our current IT network, we can do similar, if not the same things on the OT network, bring them into one system and view it as one giant ecosystem that we can monitor.
Ronnie or Chad, anything you're observing in trends?
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with what Tom's saying there. This is going on, you hear about this IT-OT convergence, and that is kind of trying to get all of this data available and analyzed. The biggest trend I'm seeing, this has been going on for a few years now, is just visibility. At the end of the day, you can't control what you can't measure. So, some of these tools that have existed in IT for, the past 10 years or longer, gaining visibility into your assets. What assets are on our network? What kind of firmware are they running? What's their make and model? Vendors are generally pretty good about saying we've identified this vulnerability and it applies to this specific controller with this specific firmware. But if you don't know what your controller is, what firmware it's loading, that information is, I wouldn't say it's useless, but it's not helpful.
And the trend that I'm seeing a lot of is that we're seeing cross-pollination of learning between the two worlds. So we want to begin to learn those lessons we learned from IT. And that's not saying IT is better. We learned the lessons because we made the mistakes. Let's learn from each other's strengths and weaknesses and take what IT learned in the past and say, let's apply those concepts of segmentation and isolation and control points to the OT world.
Ronnie, you made two amazing points there. I think that the first one is around the change in culture. 10 years ago, at design time, cybersecurity may or may not have been a criteria. The second point you made around segmentation is a great jumping off point into zero trust. The point of entry is still going to be the laptop where the phishing link got clicked. So why does everybody in the organization on a flat network have access to every system? Like everybody else, I like to kid around once in a while and make the point, why does Tom have access, or why do I have access to the login screen on the payroll system? There is no legitimate reason for me to have access to that system. But prior to changes, I would have had. In the current world with zero trust implementation, I have only access to the systems that are in my scope of role. I look at it strictly from the perspective that it reduces the blast radius. A compromised device can only be used to attack systems that the device has access to. So on a flat network, as Ronnie pointed out, it's everything and it spreads quickly. On a zero trust network where, as I said earlier, the laptop only has access to the user's scope of role, the blast radius is much, much smaller.
And the trend I'm seeing is creating a second account for that with those privileges. Accomplishes two things. That's one more account that would need to be compromised, but also, from a system safety standpoint, it's a conscious decision that I'm having to log out of my regular day-to-day account, log into my account that has these elevated permissions. And it's just, call it a sober second thought or just a break in that process. Not only is it more secure, it also prevents somebody from maybe accidentally-ing a system by, doing something they didn't think they had permission to do.
Yeah, and we can go even further than that. You can have the dash admin account, which someone always has, but for some, we're even going beyond that with the password management systems, which means that you have to book out. You actually get permission to access that administrative account for a short period of time. You check it out like a library book, and at the end of the day, you check it in. So that way we know who's had it, when they've had it. You don't just automatically get your own.
With the type of implementation that Chad and Ronnie are discussing is incremental audit on those. It's hard to audit every user activity by every team member. But if it's an administrative account that requires specific login to do those things, you can audit the entire thing. And You can go back to the user and say, hey, can you show me the ticket? Can you show me the approval? Can you show me why you made this change?
Can I just add one little other part of this that we're seeing as a significant trend in the IT world that I think is propagating into the OT world, and that's insurance. The insurance companies are making it increasingly hard to get any kind of protection in the cybersecurity space without taking these measures. So whether you want to do it or not, or whether it's an operational impact, certainly we're seeing organizations having to take these steps just to get insurance to keep their business operational.
Are there any other steps that we're taking in terms of OT's defenses that are worth mentioning or important trends?
I think Chad touched a little bit on inventory, knowing what device is where with what firmware. And in an environment like Metrolinx or like Kira, where a lot of the equipment is in the field, vulnerability management becomes an issue. We're seeing a trend more and more being asked by implementation teams who are, for example, building rail lines, what rules would you like us to write into the agreement with the subcontractor? I think that's an amazing trend. It's excellent.
Okay. So sometimes Canadians see themselves as kind of at the edge of the known world, so that the nation actors really don't care about Canada, so I don't need to take extraordinary steps. Do we see any bad actors that are sponsored by nation states poking around Canadian operational facilities?
Canadian money is still good money to an attacker. They don't care. If they can hold you to ransom and they can get you, they don't care who it is. And don't think those bots are out like, we're going to pick this one hospital down in the southern state of the US and we're going to attack them. That's not how this works. There are bots that are just rampantly attacking every single IP address they can get. Once they've cracked open a door, that team sells that information to another attacker. They then get in there and dwell and find out what's there. They then sell that attack information to the next attacker, and that attacker says, okay, I can get into an OT network here, I'll do it. So it's not about being targeted, it's about being connected makes you a target.
Maybe we'll just have one closing comment from each of you. I'll pick on Chad to start.
I think at the end of the day, all of this comes down to, two topics we've discussed in detail. One is access. Who's accessing your systems and how? How are we controlling that external access into the system and how are we monitoring it? And the second is just, asset management. What do you have? What are its risks? How have you mitigated those? How have you ranked those?
The last thing I'd like to say is that you don't want to be afraid. I mean, you need to be cautious, but being able to actually take these steps can truly transform your business and allow you to do things you could never have done any other way.
I'm just going to extend what Chad said because I think it's important that it comes back to fundamentals. So Zero Trust is amazing, and there's lots of really cool things we can talk about in cyber, but at the end of the day, it comes down to, do you have appropriate governance? Do you have appropriate GRC? Do you have an appropriate process for knowing who did what and who's in the organization and who has left the organization?
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you sharing your time, your experience, your expertise with our MapleSEC audience here in the fall of 2023. So I'm grateful for your contribution, and I wish you well as you help your customers and your organizations meet this threat and keep everybody safe.
I walked away from this thing keeps coming back to me on every time we come up with this. A couple of themes. Visibility. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. We're going to have a whole session on that next. And I think that this stuff all ties together. But this idea that I started out when we first had our conversation, I started thinking, OT and IT really are are different. But I saw a lot more similarities after your panel.
Well, I think we heard Chad talk about convergence, and we heard Ronnie talk about learning from each other, IT versus OT. So maybe those worlds aren't as different as they used to be.
Yeah. It used to be it was a Duke about war in there. And Randy, the other piece that Randy put a comment in the chat, and we were all welcome to put comments in the chat. It was really good. And this was the vector of least resistance. Nobody wants to be the place where it's easy to hack, right?
Nobody wants to be there. No.
Yeah.
I mean, the attackers only have so much time and so much energy, and I'm sure there's a tendency towards some laziness on that side of the fence too. So they're going to run down the path of least resistance. And if that's in the interface between your IT and OT systems, well, that's where they'll run down.
Yeah. And there's a lot to get done in this. Yogi, I want to thank you. One of the reasons I love working with you is Yogi, for the audience, Yogi's one of the most organized and driving guys that I know. If I was going to put anybody in charge of anything, it would be you, because you just make sure stuff happens. And I think that's a big secret. They say that 90% of life is just showing up. 90% of cybersecurity is just doing the right things. I had this discussion with everybody yesterday. I said, just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything.
Absolutely. Do what you can within the constraints of your budget or your talent or whatever. And if those aren't enough to drive the risks around cybersecurity, well, you've got to put up your hand. You can't just hide in your cubicle.
Yeah. Thanks, Yogi. And I'm coming back for your workshop. I'm looking forward to it. So I'll see you in a little while.
Okay.
Our next session, this really dovetails from this, and I'm quite thrilled with how well this is all fitting together in there. And I'm sort of observing this as it all puts together. But we had a discussion. We started a discussion about making things visible. If you can't protect what you can't see, and that one of the things that just drives me immensely crazy as a CIO and as I guess our overall CISO in there, at least the head of the organization in there, is that I know every defense is porous somewhere. Somebody always gets through. There is no perfect perimeter. And I know we need to be resilient, but what's percolating in there and what drives me to crazy is this idea that there are people you can't see in your network. They're lurking, undetected. They're scoping you out. They're looking for ways to attack you. And if you don't believe they're in your network, then I think you're living in a fantasy world. Somebody always gets through. So I wanted to figure out how we deal with those threats. And I met Chad Skipper from VMware, and we're gonna roll with that discussion with Chad because Chad is fantastic in terms of being able to help you understand how to get visibility in a network. Now he's going to talk about it in the concept of VMware, but being realistic, most virtualization happens with VMware. I can't explain how to do it in Hyper-V, but we'll at least take a look at it in the VMware world and see some of the tools that are available in your virtualization to make things visible. Let's go for it. Take it away. My guest today is Chad Skipper. He's the global security technologist from VMware. Welcome, Chad.
Well, thanks, Jim. Happy to be here and look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, we talked before this, and you have a fascinating background. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. So I started off in the United States Air Force in air intelligence in the Air Force Information Warfare Center back in, let's call it the early 90s. From there, I've done several startups and several large organizations. Startups have been bought by Symantec, Symantec as the first one. Spent 9 years at Cisco on the networking side, network security side. Went to the endpoint for a while, spent some time in the office of the CTO at Dell, as well as another startup called Silence that got bought by BlackBerry. And then recently I went back to the network side and really started looking at network detection and response relative to threat actors inside the perimeter, and was at Lastline that got bought by VMware. And today I'm at VMware as the global security technologist, part of the R&D, research and development, advancing our technologies to detect anomalous and malicious activities inside organizations.
We started talking about this conversation with the idea of raising visibility in there. Do you want to share that with our audience, what you meant by visibility and why that's important?
I'll start off with this. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. And in today's organizations, most of the traffic is internal, meaning it's once threat actors get inside, they're staying in there for quite a while. But most of the traffic for organizations is internal, what we call east-west, right? From device to device, from workload to workload, from application to workload, lookups, those types of things. A lot of traffic is inside the perimeter. And the challenge has always been getting visibility into that perimeter or even that virtualized area inside of your organization. That's always been a problem through traditional routes because traditionally, technology was only looking at north-south, ingress and egress. I see the attacker come in, and that's about all I'm able to see. So that's why it's imperative for us to really turn on the lights inside our virtual infrastructure so that we can see and then begin to detect those threat actors that are hiding, what I call hiding within the noise of our network.
I love that approach and the east-west thing. I always talk about it as moving horizontally, but when you put the east-west there, you've got the inside-outside, which we've really focused on, and really maybe not focused so much on that horizontal movement, that inside movement in there, and the way that these companies or these attackers are hiding. We've talked about this before. They spend a long time or a short time in our environment. There's lots of different ideas on that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So let me give you an analogy, right? So think of an intruder coming into your house and living in your house and you not knowing it for 9 months, 277 days without being detected, right? That's what we're up against. Threat actors gain that initial access, and then they're able to hide within the noise of our networks, going from device to device, exploiting things, doing things, and then exfiltrating data. On average, our detection is they've been in there for 9 months, 277 days. That's like somebody going in your house, going room to room, looking at your tax records, understanding who you're phone calling, everything about your life they understand. And in fact, there are some cases where threat actors have been inside so long, they know the network better than the organization does. So it's imperative that we start looking and gaining that visibility inside so that we can, either prevent or reduce the dwell time of those threat actors inside of our organization.
But if this is something we know, why is it should be important? Why is visibility so challenging in our network world or virtual world?
Well, I'll talk about it from there's a traditional approach and why it's so challenging. And the traditional approach is I'm going to bolt on a firewall on the outside and just look at north-south. I'm going to bolt on an intrusion detection and prevention system on the outside and, turn on all the signatures and get a lot of false positives, but I'm only seeing north-south. And if I want to see some things inside, that's when I would have to, either span, tap or hairpin traffic out. And the challenge is traditional technologies is taking the data to the security, security device, and it's after the fact, and you're not in line with it. And at this point, you're only sampling. So that's been the challenge of taking traditional technology and trying to fortify a virtual infrastructure, because sometimes that traffic inside never crosses a physical router, never crosses a physical switch, never crosses a virtual switch. So the question is how do you get visibility into that if it's staying within, a certain order of your organization?
No, that's the question I'm asking you. Sorry.
So that's a traditional sense, right? So that's the challenge. Now, the way that can be done is in a virtualized infrastructure, as an example. Yeah. What we have done at VMware is we've integrated, right, the technology directly into the VNIC itself. So think of the vSphere cluster right there on the VNIC. We have integrated, the ability to inspect artifacts. So understanding if this is ransomware right there on that VNIC before it even writes the disk. On the VNet, we have visibility to all the traffic, both north-south coming into the virtual stack, but also east-west, wherever that traffic goes, because we're on the VNet. So that gives us visibility to 100% of that traffic inside. So given that visibility, now we can apply different forms of security technology directly to the data itself when we see it on that VNet. So intrusion prevention, intrusion detection systems. On that VNet, we're going to see Log4j exploits as an example, right? Exploits against those applications. We're going to see drive-by downloads. Somebody clicked on something in a VDI and it went out and downloaded some remote access Trojan. We're going to see that as well. We're going to see things like east-west command and control. So as an example, somebody gets compromised. They're using PowerShell as an example, just like network administrators, to create east-west communications on compromised devices. The IDS IPS is going to see that anomalous activity. And here's what we're seeing. We're seeing threat actors use things like remote desktop protocol once they're inside the organization. Now, remote desktop protocol is an administrative tool. Administrators use it all the time to manage their organizations, and threat actors are using it just like network administrators to manage their infrastructure, their malicious infrastructure inside, and manipulate workloads and endpoints. And it looks almost just like a network administrator. So that's where anomaly detection comes into play, to where you have to have visibility to everything so that you can see these anomalies and then determine if they are actually security relevant.
So if I've got this straight, if I'm running VMware, and VMware is used in a large number of I guess probably the dominant software or dominant approach to virtualization.
Yep.
Yeah. If I've got that running, does this come packaged? How do I activate this? How do I use this?
So that's what's great about this, right? It is software, right? Is already embedded into the under infrastructure of vSphere. So all you really have to do, it's a license, and then literally it's a click of a button to turn on these technologies. I click on a button to turn on IDS through policy-based to protect against, as an example, exploits or command and control traffic. It's a click to turn on the sandboxing that detects the malware on the VNet itself for every single workload. And then with our ongoing NSX intelligence and network traffic analysis, this is our ability to see everything east-west. Again, an offer with a click of a button to turn on to give us that visibility. So operationally, very, very efficient. What we want to do is be in line. The network is the ground truth. It is. Threat actors cannot manipulate network traffic. Once it goes over the wire, it is over the wire, right? They can manipulate endpoints. So if we can understand and get visibility to the ground truth, that then is going to enable us with high efficacy and efficient alerts that we can then send to the customer's SIM, orchestration, those types of things. And it's reducing the false positives from that perspective, having visibility to 100% of that traffic.
And given what we've talked about, the perimeters become porous. I mean, I think we've said this, we should expect that somebody's going to breach our perimeter, no matter how good your defenses are.
I told you the story, when we talked. I remember installing, Checkpoint on a Spark 5 in 1994 when I was, in the Air Force, and naturally being an air intelligence agency in the Air Force Information Warfare Center, we've got to find ways of defense and ways of offense. So yes, it's been porous since the first commercially available firewall.
But now that we've got this ability to see these attackers early, we can detect them earlier and take action? That's the essence of what we're saying?
Absolutely. So if you take a look at the blind spots inside of your organization, that blind spot today is 277 days without being able to detect them because of the lack of visibility inside your organization to really put together what the threat actors are doing across the attack chain. So, yes, our goal is to get that visibility so that we can either prevent, because we have preventative capabilities across the entire MITRE attack chain, right? But either prevent or reduce that dwell time so that we have the visibility into those anomalous activities that threat actors are using. Here are the top 3 protocols that threat actors are using inside of the organization. RDP, using it just like network administrators to move laterally. Number 2 is pass the hash over Kerberos. Once they get your credentials, they're doing pass the hash over Kerberos to gain credential access laterally. And number 3, SMB Samba. They are using that just like we are to move their malware laterally throughout the organization so that they can become persistent on those workloads, those VDIs with the remote access Trojans, and gain that persistency in the organization. And I'll say the 4th one, and it's very difficult, but we do have solutions, and this is around anomaly detection. They're using DNS to create tunneling operations to exfiltrate data outside the organization.
Yeah, and so with this new approach, you can spot these things happening. You do get some warnings, dashboards. How do you get communicated to?
Absolutely. So we have our correlation capability. So we'll see the malicious payloads or the exploits or the lateral movement, these types of things, and we'll correlate it and connect the dots and provide a blueprint of exactly a delineation of all of your assets, who is coming in, and then what they're doing inside East-West. And we'll give you a timeline. We'll say something as, hey, we saw this drive-by download or this exploit onto this workload or VDI, whatever it might be. 15 minutes later, our IDS IPS captured command and control communications north-south because they got to get that command and control established. From there, we'll see things like remote desktop protocol lateral movement or credential access over Kerberos past the hash, or some type of beaconing activity east-west to another device like Empire Agent using PowerShell. And we'll see them laterally hop to another device, and then we'll see things like, all right, they're on that device. Now we see malware being moved laterally to that device, that remote access Trojan. And here's another thing that we see. Once a threat actor gets in, we're seeing them move laterally in 44% of the cases. 44% of the cases, I'm able to move laterally, right? And most of the time, they're very strategic and only moving laterally to 2 to 3 devices. And then once they're able to take that data and exfiltrate it over DNS, as an example. And we'll connect the dots along the way of everything that we see and giving you an attack chain, a timeline of what that threat actor did inside of your organization.
So this is truly that last missing piece. And I'm not saying we're perfect at security, but you really do have cemented the last piece of this. We've spent a lot of time on perimeters. We spent a lot of time on, hopefully we're spending a lot of time on education and the user group, but finding and locking down that hidden attacker and keeping them from moving laterally seems to be the last big brick in the wall of defense.
I'm not taking anything away from the perimeter. You still have to have it, but lateral movement is the next battleground. Absolutely. Once a threat actor gets inside and we know it's happening on a consistent basis, you got to turn on the lights. And we can turn on the lights, right? Visibility into everything inside the organization. Once you turn on the lights, you can begin reducing the blast radius, meaning I can do segmentation, micro-segmentation to reduce the blast radius of threat actors being able to move laterally. But here's the thing. Threat actors are using common ports and protocols that go between the segmentations, RDP, SMB, DNS, HTTP, HTTPS. So that's why you have to, again, inspect everything and get visibility to all of that packet and processes so that you can apply these technologies that I talked about directly to the data itself so that we can see these anomalies, detect these threat actors inside, and reduce or prevent and or reduce that dwell time of those threat actors inside the organization.
Well, Chad, anything that reduces the dwell time, anything that reduces the impact of these attacks is something we have to look at.
Absolutely.
I thank you very much for raising this. The idea you can't protect what you can't see. Great idea, Chad.
Absolutely.
My guest today has been Chad Skipper. He's the global security technology from VMware, talking about that last piece of security, protecting and being able to see that last thing you can't see. Thank you very much. You can't see it, you can't protect it. Visibility. There's somebody living in your house for 9 months and you don't know it. That and the idea we need to detect and protect this east-west movement, in there. That still hangs in my head after that discussion. And the fact that the tools are out there. You just need to know what's possible. Interesting. So yeah. Okay. I want to just run a quick poll, and then we're going to get into the workshop piece. I don't want to interrupt too long, but I would like to get a little feedback from you, if that's okay, if people would be so kind as to just take it. And it's just a couple of quick questions. I want to know, how are you finding these sessions over the past 2 days? Very useful, interesting, or do you have some suggestions and improvements? And if you do, I'd love to get back to you and figure out how we can work that. And how we can get some input from you on how we can improve. We always want to try and improve. So if you can give me that little bit of feedback, that would be great on the poll. Do we have an answer on those polls there? Do we just show them? Yeah, very useful, interesting. Okay. Would you recommend this to a colleague? Yes, thanks. So we're hitting the mark. Great, and that's fabulous. I won't keep you long in that. I want to do one last thing and before we start the workshops, and then I want to thank our sponsors again. And for those people who've come in and you've come in later from the sponsor intro. As a publisher, we can't put these events on without sponsorship. We need that sponsorship to do these. So Ricoh, Kyndryl, Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, Okta, Toronto Metropolitan University, VMware with the last session, the CIO Association of Canada, big supporter, Gartner, and the McKinsey Institute. To all of those organizations, and if they're commercial organizations, they call you, please, you don't have to buy anything, but just say thank you. And of course, if you want more information on the CIO Association, get in touch with me, and I'd be pleased to connect you with that. We're gonna. One last thing I want to remind you for everybody who's here is mark your calendars, because Analytics Unleashed is going to take place on December 5th. And we're going to explore AI and its impact on analytics. A big relationship, data and security, analytics and data might be well worthwhile even for cybersecurity professionals to check that out. And so that's that part of the show. I want to bring Randy in now. We're going to just change gears, and I'm going to turn it over to our hosts who are doing the workshops. Randy Purse is the Senior Cybersecurity Advisor for Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. And Randy's going to take a deeper dive into what we heard from Hasham yesterday. I'm not going to take any thunder from you, Randy. I'm just going to let you introduce it all.
Sounds good. I'm just going to share my screen if you don't mind now. Okay. So thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. So today what I'm going to do is, yesterday, if you were with the workshop, you probably heard about our cybersecurity talent management playbook. And basically this playbook is a culmination of a number of discussions with industry, across industry, including not only senior level executives within the cybersecurity industry, including peripheral industries such as ISPs and telcos and such, but also hiring HR and hiring managers in non-cyber industries. So we're really pleased to be able to sort of pull this all together in the playbook. And what this little workshop is about, and it's fairly concise, is to basically draw you through the talent management playbook, and also get you to ask some questions of your own organizations as you move forward. So first is, why does talent management matter, right? This is a huge issue for a lot of reasons, but we don't tend to think about it in cybersecurity. We think about training, we think about people, but in organizations, talent management matters largely because we know we don't have enough. We don't have enough talent, right? There's many reasons why we don't have enough. I'm not going to go into them here. I could spend a week on that. The talent pipeline, the talent pipelines that exist tend to be long and not necessarily generate what industry needs. We know that a lot of the post-secondary institution activities or programs are long and don't always hit the mark. There are challenges for organizations, regions, sectors in finding, attracting, recruiting, developing, and retaining the right type of talent. And all of this creates real and significant risks at almost all levels, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're in an organization, in a sector, region, or at the national level, having a lack of talent is problematic from a cybersecurity perspective. And some of the earlier speakers talked to this, right? The healthcare community is lacking in people, so that really impacts on the ability of healthcare deliverables. So why the playbook? Well, there were a number of things that we noted. There's ongoing struggles within organizations, but more broadly, there's disparate narratives on what constitutes cybersecurity work. There's certainly not a good load of data in Canada. In fact, a lot of the cybersecurity data on the cybersecurity workforce in Canada is incomplete or generalized or extrapolated from global data or US data. So we don't have a good capture of the data, which is problematic with respect to figuring out who or what we need. There's certainly appreciation of the problem. There's no doubt in my mind that people are talking about cybersecurity talent all over the place, but there's no real evidence of systemic change, despite the fact that we've got this problem. And there's limited integration of industry's perspectives on talent needed, particularly within, we're seeing some advisory groups showing up in post-secondary institutions, but there's still a lot of isolation of academia with industry, and still some isolation in levels of government with industry. So, and one of that quote down below is really what helps drive some of the desire within the playbook for the development of a playbook. This couldn't have been done without the participation of many people. And so this just shows you that we took a collaborative approach on this. There was no way that the Catalyst was going to be able to create this without this sort of engagement from both from across the industry, and also again with the input from not only cybersecurity professionals but HR and hiring managers. So we generated the cybersecurity talent management playbook basically to help organizations, better identify and manage cybersecurity talent, and provide a roadmap for collaborative activities at the community, regional, and sectoral levels. And the link is right there, and I'll have the link at the end too. But I just wanted to show you this playbook, and we'll walk through the playbook. And the workshop is about understanding the playbook and actually considering each of the main components in the employment life cycle. So this is basically what the playbook is based on, right? Is this employment life cycle, and the whole point is to figure out what's happening in each of these areas, because they're all distinct as we move through talent management. And so when we were looking at this and we were talking to industry, we were talking to people, we were talking to hiring managers, we found these issues as we move through. So first thing we'll do is talk about finding and attracting. So just in the chat, if you will, just what kind of issues do you think there are with finding and attracting in cybersecurity? So what kind of issues are there in cybersecurity with finding and attracting talent? Anybody got any ideas? While you're genning on that, what I'll do is I'll just put so there's a number of things, and some of these were mentioned already. Not looking inside, generating internal talent is important, and going back to the previous comment from John saying if you don't get the basics right, that's a problem. The not looking inside for the talent, for example, there are a lot of cybersecurity functions that don't require cybersecurity professionals. So thinking about ramping up people's expertise and skills within the organization to deal with cybersecurity management, cybersecurity technical skills, et cetera, even though you don't have a cybersecurity individual. So that's certainly a important point. Ill-defined job descriptions. These are very common throughout the organization. You could have a cybersecurity analyst that's defined as an entry-level position and somebody who's got 50 years in. So that's problematic across the landscape. Cut and paste job postings, including this is problematic when organizations just cut and paste job postings because they think that's what they need. There's certainly limited engagement with other talent pools. The large majority of our research indicates that most of the cybersecurity hires are coming from personal referrals and staffing organizations. So we're not necessarily exploring some of the other talent pools that exist, and we've heard this all the time. And then, of course, cybersecurity has a PR problem, right? We have a public relations problem in that we're not really talking about ourselves. We're not talking about what cybersecurity is more globally about. Everybody thinks it's still a technical field, that you need an advanced degree to get into it. That if you don't have technical skills, you won't get a job. Well, that's not the reality, as we all know, right? So this is some of the challenges around finding and attracting. One of the things that I want to actually highlight that matters at the individual group, organizational, or at the regional or sector level is actually identifying what the gap is, right? Where is this knowledge and skill gaps that we have within organizations or within the community that we need to close? What does that look like? We have an existing current performance. We have an understanding of that. We understand that not having the right talent is causing us risk. So let's identify that gap, including including capability gaps that we need to close, and figure out what kind of knowledge and skills and abilities and other characteristics that we want people to have in order to provide desired activities, right? In order to do desired performance. But this performance gap also includes a lot of other things, okay? And by all means, refer to the handbook because there's a number of issues in there. This is really a really important aspect to get, is what a capability do we want, and how are we going to create that capability, and what role do people have in that? We talked about human issues at the very beginning, the human factor in cybersecurity. Well, let's dig into that a little bit. Let's get a little bit more granular about what do we need and how are we going to fill that. So for finding and attracting, here's 3 questions that you should be asking, right? If you're in an organization that is struggling in getting the right talent, these are 3 questions we should be asking. And then in the playbook, we have a number of checkpoints, but this is a list, right, of that you could look at and see, have we done this? Are we doing this? As Jim was pointing out earlier on, we can't do everything, but there are some things we can do. What can we do right that will help us find and get the right type of talent inside? Okay. And this applies at the organizational level, but it also applies in sectors, it applies in regions, and it applies across the nation. At the community level specifically, there's a lot of things we can do that we're not doing, that I think that we're not regularly doing, that we need to be capturing as well, right? So, for example, really promoting cybersecurity is an interesting and rewarding field of work. There's a lot of people out there, youth and people who are looking at mid-career transitions, that don't understand cybersecurity. So we need to provide some information about it. And then, also offering and widely advertising work integrated learning, co-op, and internship opportunities across more than technical fields, more than CS programs or IT programs. What about to other digital domains? What about to management domains and things like that? There's lots of opportunity in there. We're just not exploiting it. So next stage is recruiting and onboarding. So what are some of the challenges do you think there are the recruiting and onboarding? Just put some ideas in the chat. Any thoughts? Everyone is too busy to onboard someone. Mismatch in terms of salary and benefits. Absolutely. Yeah. Linking skills to gaps. Yeah. Yeah. So all of these things are sort of in play here. We can't seem to reach the right people. So there's a lot of issues there, and many of you have echoed some of them as well. Recruiting capabilities versus hiring expectations, that mismatch. There's lack of consistency across the recruiting and onboarding process. There's minimal data collection in this space. We don't know how well we're doing in a lot of cases, right? We're sometimes, particularly in onboarding, we overwhelm the candidates. We may overwhelm them in recruiting, but we also overwhelm the candidates in onboarding. There's also sometimes lack of senior level engagement. It doesn't need to be the executives, but needs, it's nice for recruits to be introduced to the people that are responsible for their functioning in the organization, right? And then also there's someplace else where we often tend to lack in onboarding is helping with social emotional aspects of transition. Almost everybody that's coming into cybersecurity is coming in from someplace else, right? So it's a different work. It's a different field. The level of concerns are different. So how are we introducing them to that? How are we introducing them to the team and making them feel welcome? So, one of the key topics in the playbook that we identify is basically recruiting making recruiting distinctive from the other things of finding and attracting, because they have different objectives and different requirements. The assessing and selecting of hires is really critical, and making sure that the assessments are valid and represent the work, and that the selection is fair and transparent. And then we can put the offer in, and then they'll come on board, right? So that's making it distinct and making it sure that we've made recruiting itself as distinct from finding and attracting candidates. So this is one of the things that we highlight in the playbook to make sure that we kind of tend to focus on. Again, 3 questions. This is a pattern throughout. 3 questions. Is our recruitment process coherent? Is it aligned with role? Does our onboarding program provide the proper support? And here's again a checklist of some things. There's more in the playbook. But take a look at these and think about, are we doing all these things? Okay. So as we move on to the community level, there's a number of things that we could take, in particular, things like sharing leading best practices within the community about recruiting and onboarding. Creating and another point here is directing unselected candidates to other organizations that may present a better fit. So there are many people who apply for cybersecurity role in organization X. Organization Y and Z are over here trying to hire people, but they don't have necessarily the same breadth of marketing on their websites, or they don't have as many applicants to their job postings. So maybe if we're working better as a community, we'd actually help direct some of the unselected candidates over to the other organizations, particularly if we think they're going to be a better fit. That's just a couple of the practices that were brought up during our discussions and entered into the playbook. Development. This is really important within the cybersecurity community. Any thoughts about the challenges with respect to development? In this case, it's primarily about learning and development. Feel free to put them in the chat. How do we develop people? Yeah, right training just in time. Yeah. Working too much to have time for development. Yeah, that's a common problem in cybersecurity, right? We need to give them the time, allotting time for them to develop. Yeah. There's always too much to do. Yeah. Yeah. So those are some great responses. I think some of the other activities is the first thing is that understanding that within the cybersecurity community in particular, a lack of learning and development opportunities within the organization is a significant dissatisfier, right? This is really one of the most important ones. It fits within the top 3 almost consistently across HR surveys. Often we think of learning and development, we view it as a cost center, vice an investment in the person. And really, there's a challenge in that space, right? We need to be thinking about investing in people, particularly if they're in a specialized field such as cybersecurity. we provide limited attention to multimodal learning. There's an awful lot of attention on specific vendor-based training, which is great. It's all good stuff. However, there are multiple ways in which particularly cybersecurity and IT professionals learn. They often learn through community practice, network engagements, conferences, symposia, and that kind of thing. They do a lot of their learning there, and that's when they, peer-based type of activities that we don't encourage and we don't do a lot. And we tend to overvalue post-secondary credentials. So we may spend an awful lot of time thinking about, okay, well, let's see if we could get this person who's got a college diploma into a university degree. Well, we need to think about the why. Why are we thinking about that if that's what we're thinking about? So there are a lot of challenges in this space. There are more defined in the playbook, but I think this is a critical topic. And here's basically just out of the playbook a number of potential program characteristics that we need to think about integrating into our learning and development programs. One I want to sort of identify is fair and ready access, particularly in larger organizations. Managers there may be different managers of different cyber teams or different security related teams. And one team all of a sudden, for whatever reason, gets a lot of access to training where another team doesn't. And that can build up resentment. And it also significantly impairs the ability of the teams to work together. And the other thing is encouraging some sort of trajectory, and in cybersecurity, again, because we get this technical mindset, we often think of the trajectory as being solely technical. They're going to become more highly specialized. Well, in reality, they can be become more specialized in technical management, architecture, or they could become more enabled and supported into other management roles. There are a number of different trajectories that somebody could take. And there again, we need to talk to people about what they want and where they need to go and where they would like to go and see how we could support that. So when we're talking about developing, there again, 3 questions, do we invest in them as professionals? What other opportunities exist for learning? And again, a couple of key checks, things that we should check on. Okay. The one thing I'd really like to do is emphasize the potential for there's a spectrum of formal and informal learning opportunities, and I think we should be encouraging our people to exercise that as much as possible. And as was noted in the comments, give them time, budget work time, as Jim said, budget work time for development. This shouldn't be all on their own time. Right? If we want them to do a good job and we need them to stay current, we need to give them some opportunity to do so. At the community level, again, I'd like to stress sort of best practices in learning and development. And cybersecurity, again, is a bit insular sometimes, and we don't talk to learning and development folks. We don't talk to managers. We don't talk to some of the other people around because we get so focused in on our work. Well, let's talk to other people within the ecosystem that can help support our desires to create more effective learning opportunities for our cybersecurity colleagues. Compensating and recognizing. So, any thoughts on this? What kind of challenges are in this space? Yeah, Paul's comment: training and benefits that benefits both the organization and individual is a key contributor to workforce motivation. Yeah. Compensating and recognizing. Yeah, people are expensive. Ridiculous candidate expectations. That is a problem, particularly right now in cybersecurity. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Universities tend to be lower paying than private sector. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of variation in the pay, and there's also high expectations, as was noted. Really, again, compensation and recognition, it's still viewed as a cost center, vice and investment. So if we could sort of change the mindset, when we think about the value and another one there, undervalued in the role. When we think about the value of a cybersecurity practitioner or professional within our organizations and what they're actually saving the organization from, when we could figure out what the return on security investment is, we could also figure out what the return on the security professional is, and we can actually articulate that with leadership. It's really helpful. And the other problem is, pertaining to the pay issue, it's not yet settled. Cybersecurity is not yet settled as an occupation. It's still emerging, and I think it's going to continue to emerge for a little while. There's a national occupational standard that Canada has, and there's a cybersecurity skills framework, et cetera, but it's still that still doesn't have a lot of visibility, and people are still sort of very inconsistent in what they define as a particular role and pay match. So we need to get some more accurate data around that and figure some of that stuff out. So some of them, money is money, and there's a number of monetary best practices, including pensions and organizational buy-ins and bonuses and stuff. But there's a number of non-monetary best practices that are out there that are expressed in the playbook that we should be looking at, particularly for small organizations that can't afford the pay of the big guys, right? So how do we provide some non-monetary best practices? And the reality is the organizational culture will likely result in better retention than an extra an extra $10,000 or $15,000 in pay. If you have a good organizational culture and a good value match with the employee, they're much more likely to stay. So compensating and recognizing what's fair, what non-monetary compensation can we offer, and what do they think? Have we asked their opinion? Right? So a number of issues here related to this. Okay, and transparency and fairness is really coming to the fore now. People are sharing what their compensation is, so you need to be very, very, very aware that this kind of discussion could be going on in the background. And if there's two people doing the same job and there's $10,000 difference, and you need to be able to figure out why that is. So, and at the community level, better data. That's the first thing I could say is better data, and then increasing awareness on what common compensation recognition practices are, so we can moderate some of the expectations. Finally, retaining and transitioning. Any thoughts on this? What kind of challenges do we have in this space? Headhunters, yeah, it's a very competitive market out there. Yeah, some people are afraid that if they train people, they'll lose them. There's data to support that. Burnout, yeah, burnout is huge. Yeah, blame for problems. Yeah, all these are good things. So there are many factors that are outside the organization's control, including personal or familial concerns, labor, economic health of the country, et cetera. But there are several factors that we've already discussed. All of these things: pay and benefits, stress, burnout, lack of opportunity to develop, poor leadership, lack of flexible work, poor working conditions are all major factors in why people leave in cybersecurity. And so retention, what should we be concerned with? Retention, our primary goals are prevention of attrition, reducing turnover, reducing HR costs. What most leaders don't understand is that to replace someone takes up to at least an additional 1/3, up to many times the cost of an employee, of just retaining the employee and giving them a little bit more benefits, right? So there's huge benefit to retention if it's a possibility, and it reduces organizational disruption. We don't know what the disruption will cost, and there's a few critical factors in there that are dealt with in the handbook, but largely it's employee engagement, organizational culture, their sense of value in the organization matter, and of course leader and manager behaviors. So in retraining and transitioning, again, 3 questions that we need to be thinking about. And here's some key points, right? Need to understand the tangible and intangible costs of losing talent. There's a balance sheet issue, but there's also an organizational disruption issue. There's also around the organizational values, right? How we treat people as they move on matters, particularly in cybersecurity because it's so small. anybody who leaves our organization and they're going to stay in cybersecurity, they're going to be a client, a customer, or a consultant, right? That's basically the way it works out. So at the community level, we have a number of things that we could be doing in order to support cybersecurity workforce development. So I know this is short. It was quick. It was a quick walkthrough of the employment life cycle, but we know in organizations we have challenges that can be addressed across the employment life cycle, and we've talked about some of them in the playbook. We go into more detail in there. In the cybersecurity community, in sectors and in regions, we have the same challenges, and it's a matter of scale. And so what do we need in order to figure some of these other challenges out? We certainly need more accurate, relevant data. We need to share more information about what's going on within the cyber ecosystem. And we need more collaboration within the cybersecurity workforce ecosystem in order to be able to identify the talent we need, figure out where to get it, how to develop and get it into the organizations that of need, right? And that will be very helpful as we move forward. And the Catalyst is really trying to, I won't bother with this because we're running out of time, but feel free to put it in the chat. What's one thing you'd like to take away from this, or what you're taking away from this? Just be aware that the Catalyst is here and we can provide you some insights into this. We're looking at putting together some longer workshops for HR and hiring managers on this. There's a link to the Cybersecurity Talent Management Playbook. And if you need to contact us, by all means, contact the Catalyst through the Catalyst link there, or to me, by all means, hit me up, right? I'd be happy to connect with you. So that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Randy, so thanks so much for this. This is really good. And we're sharing the link to the talent playbook. The one question I keep, because this is my first exposure to this, I've heard about it for some time. What is the one piece of advice you would use to people who want to use the playbook? You download it, but what's your vision of how it gets used?
So because it's such a broad, it's actually the entire HR spectrum that's in there, really. But because it's such a broad application, figure out where you are within an organization and pull out the things that you think you need to use, and then there are checklists in that playbook, and just go through the checklists and honestly answer the questions, right? If you can, and you may have a negative response to the question, well, that's fine. Then it identifies an area that you need to work on within the organization, and then sort of draw the rest of the organization, the cybersecurity relevant folks into the discussion. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen within cybersecurity since I've been involved, and that's been 20 some odd years, is that cybersecurity is still very insular, and they don't talk to HR people. They don't talk to other people. They're sort of trying to do this all on their own. And there's so much expertise at their disposal. And the playbook hives off some of this stuff and encourages people to talk about cybersecurity within their organizations with other people, right? So it's certainly not an IT only concern. It's certainly not just a cyber team concern. The organization, if they don't get it right and if they don't have the right people, the risks are significant. And again, that scales up to communities, sectors, and regions.
I hear this time and time again from CIOs and CISOs that I talk to about cybersecurity, and it's sort of derogatory. There's a rift between HR and the cybersecurity people, and they don't understand us. They put these impossible job descriptions, these things together. And when I saw this, the other thing that struck me is this is a really good way to open that conversation.
100%.
And whether you're an HR person who takes this over and says, look, I'd like to sit down with you and talk to you about this, or whether you're a CISO or somebody says, I need to talk to you about why my needs are different. That's the one thing I'll take away from this. And they're just fabulous. Thank you so much, Randy. That was great.
My pleasure.
Right.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, we're going to bring in our next guest here, my friend Yogi Schultz. Yogi, we work together remotely all the time. I think we've been together in person only a couple of times, and every time has been enjoyable. This next workshop, I'm going to let you. I'm not going to take any thunder from you. I'm going to let you introduce it, but I will preface it with the fact that when Yogi first talked to me about this concept, and as I said, I think he's one of the most organized and thoughtful people that I know in terms of how to put a process together. I went, there's no excuse for not using what you're about to go through. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's something everybody wants to do, and no excuse to do it. Take it away, Yogi. You're up. Yeah, we got to unmute you. So
Thank you, Jim, for that endorsement. I hope I can share some ideas today as we discuss how to assess your cybersecurity at warp speed. So we're going to start out with a poll. And, oh, wait a minute, I got to share my screen. Okay, so here's the poll. My management satisfaction with our cybersecurity operation is unhappy, swings back and forth between happy and unhappy, mostly happy, but still nervous, happy, or super happy. Please click on what you think is going on in your organization.
I could hum the tune to Jeopardy while we're waiting for the answers. Doom, doom.
Okay, everybody had a chance to contribute to that. Here's the result. Still nervous.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your sharing that reality with me. Okay, so we all know how the poll works, so that's great. So I'm going to share my screen now, and here we are. Okay, everybody sees the poll, and here we are. So thank you, Jim, for inviting me to participate and present here at MapleSEC 2023. And here's our title, Evaluate Your SMB Cybersecurity Defenses at Warp Speed. My name is Yogi Schultz. In this workshop, we'll discuss how to achieve a high level of assurance over the state of cybersecurity defenses at small and medium-sized businesses using a low-cost, low-effort process. Some of you may be skeptical that low cost and high level of assurance can be achieved given the complexity that many associate with cybersecurity. So I hope to convince you that these goals can be reconciled and that an inaccurate perception of high cost should not cause you to neglect cybersecurity defenses. Warp speed is a reasonably term for the evaluation process because it really is high speed. So SMBs can achieve cybersecurity assurance with modest effort. So if you have any questions, by all means, type them in the chat. And Jim has agreed to interrupt me if necessary, if he thinks we should deal with that right away rather than wait towards the end. So let's look at the outline. What are some of the impediments to effective cybersecurity defenses? We'll remind ourselves of the significant consequences, and we'll talk about the consequences of ignoring this. And we'll talk a little bit about what it takes to conduct a cybersecurity evaluation. And we'll talk a little bit about the CIS critical security controls, because the process I'm here to describe to you today is based on the CIS controls. We'll talk a little bit about the value of those controls, and then we'll wrap up with some conclusions and recommendations. So this is me. I'm an IT consultant. As Jim has mentioned, he and I have worked together for many years on many adventures at IT World Canada. That's probably enough about me. And what are some of the impediments to effective cybersecurity defenses? Well, some people believe it's too difficult to evaluate. It's too difficult to know how high the risk really is amid the media hype about damaging incidents and vendor exaggeration of risks. It's difficult to know how far to drive the risk down, given the increasing cost for software licenses and staff. Some people think that it's just simply too expensive. We can't afford it because of the software and the people, the consultants I need. Some people believe that their organization is too small, too low profile, too inconsequential to attract the attention of cyber attackers. Spending the money just isn't justified. Some people worry that it consumes too much staff time. And some people say, you know, my IT staff is doing well within our budget constraints. I have confidence in their work. I think we're covering the basics well. That's good enough. So I'm sure you've run into some of these impediments. So let's look at poll number 2. What's the biggest impediment to operating effective cybersecurity defenses at your organization? The risk is too difficult to evaluate. Management views is that the risk is low. Cybersecurity operations consume much staff time. I'm proud of what we're doing. I can't convince management of the risks. What do you think? Here we are. too difficult, management view, so a huge cross section. Okay. Thank you for your comment. Okay, moving on. What are the consequences of ignoring cybersecurity? I think we don't need to spend a lot of time on these because you've probably heard them many times. Reputational damage, financial losses, fines, market share losses, loss of revenue. Taken together, these impacts create a significant risk of business bankruptcy or cessation of operation if you're a nonprofit. 20% of small companies go out of business within 6 months of falling victim to a data breach or cyber attack. So that's pretty daunting consequences. Okay, so what are some of the common concerns about doing this? Why should I do it at all? How can you reduce your cybersecurity risk without spending a lot of money and consuming lots of staff time? Well, we've talked about how you need to know what you have and you need to know what's going on. How can you objectively understand where your cybersecurity defenses are in good shape and where you need to pay more attention? Can you really make a granular assessment? How can you be assured you're addressing your cybersecurity risks comprehensively? Yeah, there are concerns about that, but I like to think we're going to answer those today. How can you confidently report the current state of your cybersecurity defenses to your senior management and board of directors with a high level of assurance? How do you actually do that? So these are valid concerns. Lots of people have them. And the concern always is, if I only have a tiny umbrella, can I really actually stay dry? And underestimating your cybersecurity risk is something that many organizations struggle with. Okay, so how do you do it, given all of these issues? My answer to the question on the last slide, and I'm sure many of you have asked, is to conduct a cybersecurity evaluation. Work will provide you with a comprehensive understanding at an affordable price. Here's how. Select someone that you have confidence to conduct the evaluation. They don't have to have a PhD or vast credentials. We just heard from TMU about what's really important. So it's not that hard to do, but you might have a senior member of your staff do it, perhaps an IT leader in a small SMB, or if you want more objectivity, call an outside consultant. Select and use a widely adopted cybersecurity framework rather than developing the process internally. You'll benefit from the collaboration and the design work of a large community of cybersecurity experts. These frameworks are freely available. One example is the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium organizations developed by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Melanie Anderson, the Director General, mentioned it yesterday during her presentation here at MapleSEC. Then you ask your staff, who are control performers, about their review of the cybersecurity work. Now, control performers are the individuals that review the cybersecurity work, not the ones who do it, that's being performed. And you simply do that with an interview. And then you share a summary of your conclusions with senior management and the board of directors. And then, of course, since you asked them for money and they were happily gave you wheelbarrow full of money, you use that money to remediate the not effective controls in your organization and thereby increase your defenses and reduce your risk. So that's the process. And I think you can see it's not that demanding, not that complicated, doesn't require an advanced degree. So a widely adopted cybersecurity framework among SMBs is the CIS Critical Security Controls. It consists of these 18 elements. We're not going to discuss them all in detail today because we'll be here all day. You can download this yourself and read them. If you download these presentation slides that you're seeing right now, you can click on the link for the document that explains these controls in more detail. Now, underneath these 18 elements that you see listed here are 153 safeguards that together define what SMBs should consider doing to minimize their security risk. Now, you may say, well, wait a minute, 153 sounds like an intimidating number. That may be overkill. Don't panic. You don't have to do all 153, but you should be thoughtful about which ones you need and which ones you don't need. Okay, so poll number 3. Have you evaluated your cybersecurity situation at all? Never, once, occasionally, regularly? What do you do? So it's a good thing these are anonymous. We don't intend to embarrass anyone by what they've done in their work. And these evaluations don't have to be done more than once a year, and once every other year or once every 3 years is probably good enough for many SMBs. Okay, regularly, 50%. Wow, I'm impressed. That's not what I usually see in these polls. It's usually more the once and occasionally are the ones that, so good for you. Obviously, we have keeners in the room who understand the importance of this work. Okay, so let's look at the implementation groups around the controls just a little more. So implementation group 1 is to implement the essential cyber hygiene to thwart general attacks. And that has 56 separate. And this is probably not what you need to plan on doing, for sure. Then implementation group 2 is about complexity, and there's another 74. And you should be very selective about whether you do these or not. And implementation group 3 is where people spend very little time currently, but given everything you've heard yesterday and today about the importance of data and starting with data, maybe you should think about which of these controls you should implement in your organizations or remediate as a result of the assessment that you're conducting here. And this is how the CIS describes it in a little graphic. So I just want to run through one example with you. Control 10 is about malware defenses. And so the first safeguard is to deploy and maintain anti-malware defense software. And I'm sure many of you are already doing that. And you can see it's the first of 7 safeguards related to malware defenses. Now, in implementation group 1, there are these 3 safeguards. You should probably do all of them. And in implementation group 2, there's 4 more that have been added that you might want to consider doing. And these kinds of tables exist throughout the entire process to guide you in the evaluation. So let's look at how these things all fit together that I've been talking about.
Yogi,
so the safeguard here is about deploy and maintain anti-malware software. And I'm sure many of you are already doing that. Then above that comes the control, which is review the anti-malware software log. So a supervisor of some kind should look at what's been going on in the anti-malware. And then the evaluation is to review just a sample of the log entries. An evaluator does that to make sure that everything is in good shape. Now, if you see there are problems, and if those problems have been addressed, that's called success. That's not called failure. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for making sure that people are paying attention, and when they see a problem, they address it. So what does this workbook look like? I think this is some detail we're going to skip today because we're rapidly running out of time. So what's the value of all this? It really does, these controls, if you have them in place, really do defend against most of the attacks that occur. And you can also assure your leadership that the cybersecurity defenses are comprehensive and have been implemented and are being operated. And it provides a framework for automating and managing all this, because if you don't automate it, it probably won't get done. So what are the alternatives for actually performing the work of the evaluation? So there's 4 that I'd like to discuss with you very tactically. You can use your internal staff resources using the Audit Scripts Critical Control Evaluation tool. And you can download that from this website, and the cost, your external cost, is absolutely nothing. Okay. Now you can also use your internal staff to conduct the evaluation, and you use the Corvell Enhanced Evaluation tool. When we sell you that for $250, and the value is that we've enhanced the Audit Scripts tool to provide guidance to the evaluator and to track who's performing the safeguards and who's performing the controls. And you may say, why is that important? Well, you often want to know, well, what happened last year and who was doing what and what were our conclusions? And using our version of the tool, you can track that. And if you want a little bit of help along the way or some orientation, we can do that. Now, some organizations say, no, I'm not going to go with internal people. I want an independent external evaluation, just like we do for financial audit. And then you can hire us to do the whole thing. And it's typically ends up costing about $10,000 to do that. So depending on your budget, your sense of the talent that you have available, and your need for independence, you can choose one of these. And it really isn't that expensive and shouldn't be an impediment to actually getting the work done so that you understand what's going on. So conducting all this will provide you with the facts about where you're at with your cybersecurity defenses. And you can be assured that the controls are comprehensive. It's difficult to claim that there are missing safeguards or that the controls are excessive. And this whole thing requires only modest effort. Many people can run through the whole set of safeguards through a series of interviews with people in 1 or 2 days. So whatever your cost or staff constraints are, they shouldn't be so severe that you can't get this work done and benefit from it. So what are my recommendations? And these are associated with the $0 alternative I described 2 slides ago. Begin by downloading and reading the 4-page summary of the CIS implementation group. It illustrates how the CIS divides the cybersecurity into various topics and provides an overview of all of the safeguards. And then you should download the CIS Critical Serious Controls Excel workbook. It'll give you a good understanding of the scope of the controls and how they're grouped. Now, to actually conduct the evaluation, we suggest that you download the assessment tool from the Audit Script website. Now, this is useful because it provides drop-down lists for choices for evaluation conclusions. It aggregates the data into a dashboard. It provides an evaluation summary and more detailed instructions on how to conduct a cybersecurity evaluation. Now, based on doing the work, you can report a summary of your conclusions to management and the board of directors. They should be impressed by how comprehensive your work is, and that'll give you an opportunity to ask money to remediate the not effective controls and thereby increase your cybersecurity defenses. Now, if you download the presentation, you can click on these links. You can see they're all in blue, and the ones in the bibliography at the end of the presentation that will help you with additional reading if you're so inclined. Let me just show you that. This is the additional reading that comes with the presentation. So let's look at poll number 4, please. So the approach I've described today to evaluate cybersecurity defenses, what do you think? Was it superficial, effective, too complicated, still too expensive, or it's actually a complete distraction from the work that we're doing and it's not needed? So people have different reactions to this approach. Some people may have had some of this work performed in a lot more detail, which does provide value, but at a dramatically higher price. So Your choice. What do you need for your organization? Okay, there we go. Many of you saw this as effective and useful, so that's excellent. So I invite you to act on your conclusion and consider it either as an improvement on whatever processes you already have in place, or if you haven't done one of these evaluations, then consider it. My name is Yogi Schultz, and if you'd like to contact me about any clarifications or details, you're welcome to do that. Over to you, Jim.
Unmute. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the point that, and I was glad you came in to do this. The point is that there are resources out there. You can find them. There are consultants out there if you need them, but there's no excuse, budget excuse, not to do a review. And as I'm always fond of saying, can you change everything? Maybe not. But if you just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do something.
Right. And perceptions of costs and staff consumption, I think, have been huge impediments that have kept people from doing the work that I've described here. So that's why I put together something that I view as modest in terms of staff effort, low in cost, and something that you can present to your management and board of directors, and it provides enough level of assurance that you can stand behind this work confidently.
And somebody from the audience asked, they like the approach, but is this reasonable for a small business to consider? And I'm going to throw one thing at you to add to that question is sometimes the terminology can get a little tough for people. What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely. The first bit of technology or terminology that creates problems, Jim, is the word control. The CFO and his or her staff understand the word control, but the rest of the organization goes, what do you mean by control? And so you have to explain that a little bit. A control is where someone is reviewing the work to make sure it's satisfactory. Most organizations are doing that. They just don't label it that way, or they see it as part of the control as part of the business process when it isn't. So that's one term. And then some people struggle with the term safeguard that CIS uses. It works very well. Is what are you doing to safeguard the organization against a very specific risk? These safeguards are quite granular. That's why there's over 100 of them. And that makes it very clear as to what you're supposed to be doing. And it doesn't fuzz it up with gray zones around the safeguard.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that all of us do who are more technically adept or don't fear those things just because we've had the experience is we stumble over these things too. But sit down, read through it, get a coffee, Google the answers, or ask people, get who are advisors like you to, can you help me out with a little bit of this thing to get started? Yeah,
there's lots of resources. There are other frameworks other than CIS control. Yeah. Our opinion is that some of those frameworks are too big and too complicated. We haven't looked at the one that Melanie spoke about yesterday.
I've actually worked with that one, and I think there's a great commonality. I was looking at some of your structure there that we haven't compared. I've worked with the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity one. Yours is very, very similar. It goes down to a series of statements and works out.
Yeah, so I kind of skipped over that to make sure we stayed on schedule, but you may like that. So, right, so you're just saying, are you deploying and maintaining your anti-malware software on all enterprise assets? Well, that's a pretty clear question.
Yeah.
So now, where are you? Do you have a written policy? Have you implemented it? Is it enforced? For each of these, you've got a choice of you pick one of 5 choices that describes your current situation.
Yeah.
So quite granular, quite specific.
So my answer to Mel, I think if I've heard you correctly, is just grab the thing and read it. You'll find out that actually when you open these things up, they're not as complex as they seem. We get frightened by the terms controls and things like that. I think you've described those adequately. Yogi, thank you so much for doing this. This has been fabulous.
You bet, Jim.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up now. Thank you all for joining me in this, and thank to everybody who's participated today. I hope this has been useful for you. We wanted to make, both provide you with information, but we also provide you with some interactive things that you can take away and do. I'll put my email in the chat as well, but I'd love to hear from you. You'll get a questionnaire on this, no doubt, from our staff saying, how did you feel about it and all that. But I'd really love to hear your comments. We do this big session, this big 2-day session once a year, and then we do 3 quarterly sessions that are smaller. And I'm always looking for suggestions in terms of what we should do, how we should do it, and how we can do it better. As they say, we're all in this together. So thank you so much. I'm going to let you have the rest of your day, and love to hear from you. And you can catch me every day on #trending, the Daily Tech News. If you're interested in security, I suggest you get to the podcast Cybersecurity Today with my colleague Howard Solomon. It'll keep you up to date on these things. Between the two of us, we'll talk to you all year. Talk to you soon.